Last lesson we looked through the Native Americans and we got really close to the end. The last little bit, the last section that we need to do is what were the Indians' beliefs. In fact, I think we've already done that, didn't we? We spoke about the Indians' beliefs and we actually spoke about the sun dance last week. The next bit, and this is the last bit, is how did the Indians govern themselves? So can you write that as a subtitle, please? And we're just going to focus on some key aspects of Indian society that revolve around how they govern themselves. So the most important person, or one of the most important people within a tribe, is the chief. So your subtitle is the chief, please. And the most important thing, who's in charge of the tribe? The chief. It is simple as that. The important aspect of the chief is down here, okay, where it says they could only give advice. So a band within a tribe could do as it pleased. Now, what that means is the chief could only give advice. He was the elder. He was the man to be respected because he has seen it all, he has done it all before, and he's the best person to give advice for the tribe. But if the tribe didn't want to, they didn't have to listen to the chief. Could that potentially cause problems in the future? Yeah. Yes. I'll give you an example. When the chiefs were negotiating after some of the Indian wars, and they brought back their negotiations to the tribe and said, hey, look, we've made a peace with the whites, that they are able to build roads throughout our lands, they're able to build military outposts in our lands. That was the Treaty of Fort Laramie, the first one. The tribes were shocked by that. They felt almost betrayed by their chiefs, and they refused to follow the deals which the chiefs had made. And obviously that causes problems in the future, and that will become clearer when we get onto it. Okay, so the chief was powerful, he was in charge of the tribe, but he could only give advice. He wasn't the be-all and end-all, he wasn't the person that you had to follow, he wasn't a dictator, he was the best person to give advice. Oh, yes. Is that that? Yeah. So the chief. Then we need to have a little think about how the tribes split themselves up, because tribes were often quite large. If you took the Sioux as the largest tribe on the plains, at their biggest, they numbered 10,000. Why is it not a good idea for them to stay together in a tribe of 10,000? What does it make difficult, Ross? Food hunting. Absolutely. Trying to hunt for 10,000 people is a challenge. So what the tribes often did, and we'll zoom in, the tribes often split into groups called bands. Okay, it says 10 groups in bands there. It wasn't always 10, it did vary in numbers. But a whole tribe is split into a band. A band usually consisted from about 300 to 500 people. And each band had a chief. So big tribes would split up into smaller tribes called bands. These bands had 300 to 500 people usually, and each band had a chief. So one tribe could have a number of different chiefs. Makes it quite difficult to organize them along one policy or one idea. And then lastly, just down at the bottom, usually yearly, each band would send 4 representatives, usually including the chief, okay? So I always like to think that each year the chiefs would meet up at a tribal council where they would discuss the big issues of the tribe, like war, hunting, land, and so on. Now, this was an important aspect of their way of life. Without this, they would have not have been so successful at living on the plains. The fact that they split up into smaller groups meant that their way of life was much easier, and as a result, they were much more successful. What did the Indians live in? Why were teepees good in the summer? Cool and breezy. Why were they good in the winter? Warm and cozy, absolutely. So the teepee suited their way of life. Who hunted the buffalo? The Indians, you are right. You're absolutely right. Who hunted the buffalo? The braves, the men. What did women and the elderly and the children do to the animals? Everything else, cut them up, butcher them. Good memories. We did this last time. I'm going to move off with this now. Please don't write it all out. If it was me, I just think tribe splits into bands, band about 300 to 500 people. Each band had a chief, and yearly the chiefs would meet up at a tribal council and they would discuss the big issues. I can still see some people writing, so quick as you can, because I'm going to move on now. Okay, if you've got any questions, ask at the end. Right, Indian punishments. Did they have prisons? Did they have judges and the police force and stuff like that? Absolutely not. And did the white people respect them for their way of life? No, they looked down upon them. How could any civilized society not have law and order, not have prisons or jails or judges? So Indians, Native Americans did not have prisons. And the white people looked down upon them for that. Okay, it's worth pointing out they were looked upon as wild savages because they did not have a structured system of law and order. And the worst punishment that you could have is to be expelled from the band, to be kicked out from your tribal group. That's bad, because if you live a communal life, your whole life is spent living amongst your family and the people you know. If you're kicked out of that band, that results in big problems for you. Just survival. So again, please do not write much. Indian punishments, they simply were very, very minimal. No big prisons, no law courts like there would be in a white person society. They did have punishments, but their punishments were very, very weak from our point of view. If you commit murder, where are you going for a long, long time? Prison. Now, they didn't have prisons, so if you were a murderer, if you killed somebody in your tribe, Dominic, you finally had enough of Kai, so you killed him. Okay. The worst punishment that could happen to you is for you to be expelled from the tribe. The more likely punishment is that now Dominic would have to look after Kai's wives and his children, because now it's not a punishment, but it's for the good of the tribe, because now we have Kai's family, his wives are left not being looked after, his children aren't being looked after. Now it's Dominic's fault that they're not being looked after. So now he has to hunt for them, he has to look after them, he makes sure he has to provide for them. Now, from a white person in white people's society, this was just nonsense. How is this a punishment? But for the Indians, this was good for their way of life. Putting all of their braves in prisons when they've done something wrong is not going to help you survive, is it? Ensure that food is put on the table, or in this case, in the teepee. So this was looked down upon by the white settlers, and it just gave the white settlers more ammunition to call them wild savages. But from an Indian point of view, this sort of process was so important for the survival of the tribe. Happy? Yeah. Excellent. Okay, next bit, war. Two types of warfare. So the first type of warfare is to get horses. Is this common? Was this common? Yes, it really was. You could just go and decide to raid your neighboring tribes' horses and bring them back. And as a result, you got respect, but you also limited your enemy's ability to hunt, your enemy's ability to fight you. The warfare to get more horses was very common. And it's worth pointing out that you did not need permission from the chief. You did not even have to tell the chief to go and steal horses from your neighbors. They did it to you, you did it to them. It was just part of their culture. When they started to do it to white people, what do you think the reaction was? They were pissed, absolutely. They wanted blood. They want, this is being recorded, we shouldn't use bad language. That's my fault and your fault. Well, I'm not going back and cutting anything out. I'm just going to upload it, okay? And make my apologies now. We will chuck our language in the future. But yeah, Ethan, you're right. When the white people started having horses stolen by the Indians, they were angry. But were the Indians actually doing anything new? No, they were just doing something that they'd always done. Stealing horses was part of their culture. When they started to do it to white people, white settlers started to demand blood. And the Indians didn't even know what they were doing wrong, really. This was just something that has happened throughout generation after generation. So this did get them into trouble with the whites. The next type of the next type of warfare was much bigger, and it was to protect hunting grounds. And usually you would have to speak to the chief about this. It was a much more organized and bigger war, and it usually was not voted upon by the tribe, but it was agreed upon by the tribe. Okay? And you got lots of respect. Going to war with your neighbors gained you respect, standing, status within your tribe. And that was important. That was something that all men wanted. They wanted to be looked upon as somebody who is brave, as a warrior. And warfare was a part of that culture, okay, to develop those attitudes that somebody within your group is a warrior, is somebody that can protect the tribe. That's to do with hunting, that's to do with warfare. Now, this ties in with warfare because they had two very different ideas about bravery that were linked to war. And the first idea was belittled by the whites. They looked upon it as a game of tag. Does anybody remember what it was called? Sam?
I don't know what it's called. It was like
Absolutely, yeah. Literally a game of tag, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. You said it then, I think. Rebecca, what is it? Counting coup. Well done. So that was one clear idea about bravery. Where is it? It doesn't say counting. Please, 1 second. It doesn't say counting coup there, but I'd like you to write. Oh, yeah, it's no, sorry, already underlined. Counting coup. And this was, like Sam said, this is where they would get close to their enemy and touch them in battle. Now, I know that sounds a little bit silly, but they would have something called, Katie, a coup stick. And the idea is, if we are going to war, let's divide the class down the middle. We hate you, you hate us. We're shooting arrows at you, you're throwing spears at us. It's dangerous. Now, anybody can throw a spear at their enemy. I could shoot an arrow in the air and hope that it hits one of my enemies. Like that's not necessarily an idea or aspect of being brave. What got them more respect, what was more braver and gained them much more respect, was to act close enough to their enemy in the midst of battle. So whilst the arrows are flying everywhere and the spears are flying everywhere, I can pick my way through the battlefield. Use usually a stick, here it is, a coup stick, you can write that down, and touch my enemy like that and get away before he kills me. Now, to the whites, that was bloody ridiculous. It was like a game of tag. How the hell is that showing bravery? Well, it does show bravery, and it shows skill, because I can get close enough to my enemy to touch them and get away without them touching or killing me. It humiliated my enemy. It made him seem weak amongst his tribal members, and it got me a lot of respect. Don't forget what you're going to say. So to the Indian society, counting coup was a big deal. It showed skill and courage, and it got you a hell of a lot of respect amongst your own tribal members. So counting coup made sense to the Indians.
Which does mean less lives killed in war.
Exactly right, and that's the next point, okay? If you live in a hunter-gatherer society, killing off your best hunters is not necessarily a good idea, is it? Because who's going to provide the food? So this was an efficient way of going to war without killing all the best warriors. Now, again, to the whites, this was stupid. It's not warfare, it's not fighting. It's just playing tag and then escaping and getting away. But to the Indians, it made sense. It meant they preserved their numbers, and it meant you always had braves to hunt and provide for the tribe. Does that make sense? To us, yes, because we're learning about it. To the white people that arrived, it didn't take any time to learn about the Indian culture. This did not make sense, and it gave them ammunition to belittle the Indians and to refer to them as wild savages, and to convince themselves, the white people, that the Indians must be educated. They must be brought up to a modern way of living. And it's our duty, the white people's duty, to do so. So counting coup made total sense to the Native Americans, but not so much in the white world. And the second idea about bravery, if you're a white man and you're fighting in the army and you're following kind of white culture and you're involved in a battle and you run away, what are you going to be referred to as? A coward, absolutely. If you're an army soldier or you're a warrior, there is more pride and honor to die in battle than it is to run away. That's the white person's view of that. Do you agree? Now, I like the Indian idea. Like, if you're going to die, run away, okay? Do not just get involved in a battle if you know you're going to be wiped out. That's just stupid. That's what the Indians thought. Run away, and you live to fight another day. Exactly that. So there was no shame from an Indian point of view of running away. And the whites hated that. They hated that the Indians wouldn't stay and fight them in an engaged battle. Because if the Indians did, who would win?
Yeah, white.
The whites, exactly. That's why the whites wanted it to happen. So, to die in battle was not a sign of bravery for an Indian. He fought. If he was going to be killed, then he retreated. And again, the whites looked down upon the Indians for having an attitude. That attitude, it makes perfect sense. If you're going to lose your best warriors, and that means that you're not going to be able to survive your way of life, then run away and live to fight another day. So, two clear ideas about bravery that the white people did not share. Counting coup, and this idea that running away was not a sign of cowardice. Okay? It was you being smart. If you knew you were going to die, then don't hang around. I quite like that attitude. I think it's a smart way of thinking about things.
Also, there's many Indian hit and run tactics against white.
Yeah, guerrilla warfare, because look, the Indians knew in pitched battles they were no match for whites' training and their weaponry. The Indians did not fight and develop tactics for long drawn out pitched battles. Their tactics were all about hitting hard, and then disappearing into the landscape where the whites can't follow you. So yeah, guerrilla warfare. It's what the Vietnamese did against the Americans during the Vietnam War, and they had huge success. Right, we've got two more things to do. Can I move off of this? In fact, I think we've only got one more thing to do, and it's scalping. When the whites arrived and they realized that the Indians scalped their dead enemy, how did the whites react to that? It was disgusting, barbaric, and it's
Sickening and unholy.
yeah, sickening, unholy. You're mutilating the dead. Those dead bodies, those people, their souls are going up to heaven, and here you are mutilating the dead. So scalping enemies was looked down upon by the whites. The whites hated it. They saw it as a barbaric act. More evidence that the Indians were wild savages. Yet the Indians scalped their enemies for a very particular reason. And maybe if the whites took the time to learn why the Indians scalped their enemies, they would have understood the practice much, much more. Ross, do you remember why they scalped them?
They wouldn't be able to hide in the afterlife.
Exactly that. You capture, the main reason why you take an Indian scalp was to capture your enemy's spirit. They believed, the Native Americans believed, in the afterlife. They lived in a world full of spirits. And if you were a successful warrior, they believed that all of your spirits, all of the spirits of the enemies you have killed, would be waiting for you up in the afterlife. So Ben, if you've been a good warrior and you've killed 100 people, you would believe that there are 100 spirits waiting up there now to take their revenge on you. As a way of stopping that spirit going to the afterlife, the Indians would scalp their enemies. So they did it for a very spiritual reason. I know it looked down upon it as quite a barbaric act, but it was done for a very spiritual reason. But the whites could not see that, did not take the time to learn about it, and they saw it as an unholy, brutal, barbaric act where the Indians were simply mutilating the bodies of the dead. And again, more ammunition to call them wild savages and to suggest that their way of life must be conquered and they must be taught the right way, the white way. I've just noticed that I've been using that for my visualizer, but it's very different to this. So I'm probably going to end up posting a lesson and not everything's in focus. We'll see. I'll get better every time, I imagine. I hope so anyway. Right, and that is it. That's the Native American way of life. It's been divided into 5 key areas. The differences and similarities, the struggle for survival, everyday life in an Indian village, their spiritual beliefs, and how they govern themselves. Are they going to ask you a specific question about any of that stuff? Probably not, unless they are asking about why the Indians were so well suited at surviving on the plains. Having said that, you do need to know all of this stuff to enable you to write detailed answers about the other topics. So let's move on to the next section. And this is going to be the Trailblazers. There was a clue there. The Trailblazers are referred to as the Mountain Men. Good. So subtitle Trailblazers / Mountain Men, whatever you wish to call them. One second. Okay, please listen. Now, the Trailblazers are a smaller group of migrants, okay? I don't think we're ever going to ask you specific questions about the Trailblazers, but you need to know about their importance in blazing the trails that everybody else followed. So firstly, and you can write this down yourselves because I don't, oh, actually it is down at the bottom. Who were Trailblazers? Don't read off the board, but who were they? They were elderly women? Young, fit men. Write it down, okay? Young, fit men. Quite often, they didn't have families back in the East, and they were moving west to seek their fortune. So young, fit, strong men. No women. Although women did go west to make money off of men. Just like today, isn't it? That's what my girlfriend does. She uses me for all of my money. She could have done better. She really could. I don't earn that much. So, the mountain men. Young, fit, strong men. Why were they going west? Why did they go past the Appalachian Mountains into this frontier? There was nothing there, like except Indians and animals and death and destruction and hard life, hard living. Angel, why did they go west? And perfect. And it does sit down there. They were after animal skins, beavers and buffalo. This was an untapped resource. Especially beaver skin was becoming very popular throughout the 1800s to make top hats, which were incredibly popular in Europe. So the West held money if you were brave enough and daring enough to go and seek it out. So the Trailblazers / the Mountain Men were young, fit, strong men, and they were going west to seek their fortune. Animal skins. Now, in going west, can I move over? Or are you still writing? Yes or no? That was a sound. Right. So they went west. What were some of the dangers for the mountain men? Yes. Weather. Write it down. Okay, just write down some bullet points. Some of the dangers. It was dangerous because of weather. So snow, the wind, the cold, the blazing hot sun during the summer months. The weather just meant that their life was miserable. What was another danger for a mountain man? Yes? Bears. We watched The Revenant, or at least we watched the trailer to The Revenant, where Leonardo DiCaprio gets attacked by the bear. So yes, wild animals. No, we didn't do that. You weren't here when we did this, but in revision, another one. No doctors. So if you get attacked by the bears, no doctors. You're on your own. But you are right in what you said. There were no women, so that meant it was a lonely existence. It wasn't necessarily a danger. You are right, but it adds to the misery of being a mountain man. The fact that you are all alone, up in beautiful environments, but very dangerous environments, and at the end of the day, you probably do crave women's company. The Indians, write that down. Another big danger. You've got to go across Indian land. So lots of examples there. Josh, question? Yeah, oh yeah, so you're going through the mountains, absolutely. You could spend, this is the last one, you could spend 3 or 4 days picking your way through a mountain pass, only to realise that you come to a dead end, and then have to backtrack the way you come, and then find another route through the mountains. And that brings me on to the next question. Why were the mountain men important for the development of the West? What did they do? What did they do? The mountain men, why were they important for the development of the West? Oh, good. Good. We're getting on to that word. We're getting on to the word manifest destiny in a minute. Yes, Ross. They made maps. Good. They blazed the trails that everybody else followed. Now, look at this, okay? It doesn't do the American West justice. Here is the East Coast, okay? That's where all the white people live, and they've lived there for over 100 years. This is what they called the Great American Desert. If you wanted to go west, you could with a compass, but you had no clue where you were going. You know in that direction is the coast, it's California, but you don't know how to get there other than a compass. So you come across mountains that you have to get over, but you don't know the way. You come across big rivers that you have to cross, but you don't know where a crossing point is, a fording point. The mountain men solved all of those issues. Seeking adventure and seeking their fortune, they blazed the trails which everybody else then followed across the nation. Without these trails, you could probably have got west, but you wouldn't want to take your family west. You wouldn't tell them to take your little children or your elderly mother because you've got no clue where you're going. You just know in that direction is California. At least with the trails, you know they will lead you through the mountain passes. They will lead you across the rivers. They will lead you as far away from Indian country as possible. So trails were really important, weren't they? Would you agree?
Yeah.
The Trailblazers, I think, were one of the most important groups for the development of the West, without a shadow of doubt, because they set the groundwork. They paved the way for everybody else to follow. So they were very, very important. Make sure you can say why. It's well worth being able to talk about individuals. If you're saying that mountain men were very important for the development of the West, it really does help if you're able to suggest some examples of mountain men. And the best one to remember, because it links to Manifest Destiny, is John Fremont. John Fremont blazed the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail was the main trail leading from east to west. It was like the main one that everybody followed. You had lots of other trails that branched off of the Oregon Trail, but this was the daddy. This was the most important one. Where is it? It's here. Goes that way and then up towards Oregon. And then you've got California Trail that branches off, the Santa Fe Trail that branches off down there. So John Fremont blazed the Oregon Trail. And the government responded to that. The government printed 10,000 copies of the Oregon Trail, which proves that the government is trying to achieve manifest destiny. You must write that down. This is a crystal clear bit of evidence that proves that even very early on in our story, the government had this idea of developing the West. Otherwise, why the hell would they have printed 10,000 copies of this map if they didn't want to get that map out and about and encourage people to go west? And the last thing that we are going to do is focus on manifest destiny, a quick explanation of what that was. Anybody remember off the top of their heads? It's actually there. If I cover it up, does anybody remember? A few people? Yeah, Aisha? Cultivate the land. Yeah, you can just use develop, that's fine. Absolutely, that's spot on. So if you've just written that John Freeman blazed the Oregon Trail, most important trail going from east to west, and the government printed 10,000 copies of his map, that is proof, that's what I'd be writing, proof the government wants to achieve manifest destiny. And here is the definition of manifest destiny. They believed in manifest destiny, that they wanted to sell all the land between the Atlantic and the Pacific, basically all of America. It's missing out one word there, that they believed it was a God-given right. That's important. Because if God wants you to do something and you're very religious, are you going to try hard to do it? Yes, because God wants me to do it. And that's the beginnings. That is the beginnings of our story. We've looked at the Native Americans, and now we've looked at the first group of individuals that moved west, which blazed the trails, which made it possible for everybody else to follow. The Mormons, the gold miners, the homesteaders, and so on. 3 minutes to 4. We're a bit late starting. Do you want to do an extra 10 minutes? Ah, no. Okay, well, I like your negotiations. What I'm inclined to do though is just for the good of the YouTube clip that I'm going to try and post, is if we stop now, next lesson we pick up gold mining, and my clip on YouTube could be gold miners and Mormons part 1, because that's what it will be. And then the session after will be Mormons part 2 and the beginning of the Civil War, maybe. I don't know. So let's stop it now. I'm going to try and upload the program to YouTube. Richard Bicknell.
Oh, your name is Rich?
Yeah.